English translation 831st Contact Tuesday, 3rd January 2023, 9:08 a.m.
Edward, greetings, here I am again, and as promised, I want to give you the data regarding the world population.
Well, greetings and welcome. That you come, that is just correct because of the overpopulation. Because I wanted to ask you about that anyway.
In a moment I will tell you the figure we have ascertained regarding the population of the Earth. I can't answer that question by saying that our very accurate count showed that at midnight there were 9,339,174,098 9,339,174,098 Earth humans populating the Earth.
If things continue like this, we will soon have reached 10 billion. Unfortunately, that is a lot more than the world population clock counts, which is not right.
That is correct, because it assumes completely wrong calculations and claims by the alleged experts, who in fact trivialize everything. The Earth is changing due to the excessive number of human beings and their machinations destroying the planet as well as destroying and exterminating nature and its fauna and flora. What used to take thousands and thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands or millions of years, in terms of evolution, Earth humans have managed to ruin the planet and its nature, fauna and flora, atmosphere and climate in just 223 years, because they have created an overpopulation that is now around 9,340,000,000, as I said earlier. As I have read in Svav's my father's annals, he has made some journeys with you into the future of the Earth and has also explained a great many things to you, but you should only if at all speak about them in hints or remain completely silent. This concerns, for example, the present events concerning the coming, that is to say the imminent serious consequences of the, as well as the fact that it, as you yourselves have seen, experienced and learned. However, I do not have the right to speak openly of this, for what I have read in the annals corresponds to records which my father marked as not permissible or mentioned to earthly humanity with regard to our directives. That, however, the entire Earth's humanity is to lose its freedom with regard to its independent decision-making, handling and dealing with its financial cash, and is to be monitored in this respect to the point of total control by the state powers and banks and other financial institutions together striving for this, I may announce. For some years now, the secret endeavor of many state powers and the aforementioned institutions has been underway to incapacitate the peoples of Earth's humanity and to deprive them of their free rights, thereby forcing them into a slave-like state. Total control is supposed to make this possible, whereby elements are striving for this who, as you say in each case, go over corpses. And this word actually corresponds to what is real and is also dangerous and life-threatening for you, because you are connected to the truth and dare to openly proclaim and spread it. This will also be so regarding what I am talking about at the moment, if you...
I see no reason why I should cowardly conceal what you say. It is not only necessary for the Earthlings to know what is coming and what is going to happen to them if they continue to just not think and allow what is being plotted against them by the rulers and the financial sharks. If something were thought out rationally by the human beings, then they would recognize reality and its truth and act accordingly. In this case, it would be the need for them to finally wake up, stand on their feet and remove all those big shots from their offices and replace them with persons who are of the right mind and are for the freedom and welfare of all.
Unfortunately, only a handful of Earth humans will understand this and seek to implement it, for the bulk of the Earth humans will not care. Elsewhere, however, anarchism will be steadily stirred up, whereby demonstrations will also increase and become more violent and destructive, causing injuries and also deaths. Nevertheless, nothing will change in the fact that the state powers of all states on Earth, as well as the banks and financial institutions of whatever kind, will stick to their ideas and plans to bring the peoples under their absolute control and to forbid them the independent right of disposal of their cash.
If the human beings remain stupid and do not learn to think again, then it will just happen, and as Verhoff said there,
you won't make any friends if you openly say what it is approaching what in earlier times the rulers in their lust for power, violence and injustice exercised on the peoples, namely that they were exploited, tortured and murdered in every conceivable way. This has been preserved in later times and up to the present day, but in a different form, which has become more deceitful, vile and detestable in this respect. Much is happening today so infamously hidden that it is not known to the peoples, which is why the striving for more power of the state powers and all financial institutions has not only promoted their criminality, crime and corruption in such a way that imitating them everything similar has also taken hold in the populations, so that all this can no longer be changed. According to our investigations and findings, all this has taken on such degenerations in the last 150 years that a new form has risen which has been spreading more and more for years, namely the electronic one, which has not proved itself in the long run with regard to the payment of purchasable goods and finally the payment for work. This was the experience of our ancestors, which is why the means of payment for all kinds of goods and wages for work were completely abolished by us Pleiadians some 52,000 years ago, since we turned to peace. This also had the consequence that all financial crime and crimes of the same kind immediately became a thing of the past and never appeared again. All production sites for any kind of goods became the common property of all peoples, while work was no longer paid for with wages, because no means of payment were necessary anymore, because everything desired and necessary for life could be acquired without them. In the course of time, as a result of more modern technology, working hours were also reduced, so that today only 2 working hours per day are required per person to do what has to be done. However, this is not possible through overpopulation, as is the case on Earth, because even the most modern technology cannot achieve this, but only a moderate total population of less than 1 billion, which is therefore adapted to the planet. Our era is about the same size as the Earth, so our world population is correctly only 530 million, which would also correspond to the Earth's humanity, which is also what the Earth's population should strive for. The mass of overpopulation that prevails on Earth, however, brings with it, as a consequence of far too rapid technical development, all the degenerations that have already risen and are still rising as a result of the ill-considered and far too rapid development of technology, about which, however, Earth humans give no real thought. He simply allows himself to be irresponsibly and thoughtlessly driven by the mania for technical development, whereby he drifts more and more away from logic, understanding and reason, as well as from reality. Through the unreasonably fast technical development, which is obviously uncontrollable by Earth humans, he brings forth a very rapid technical development of artificial intelligence, which is simply an attempt to be able to manage human thinking, working and acting and so on electronically. This also applies to computer technology, to which everything and anything is to be transferred, and thus also to give it artificial intelligence. This, however, is highly dangerous in all respects, because instead of everything being programmed into the artificial intelligence for each individual step and purpose in a logical and very careful and deliberate manner, the artificial intelligence is inadequately programmed for safety, so that it can ultimately take on a life of its own. This means that the artificial intelligence can then find answers and solve problems on its own, without the human beings being able to do anything about it. As a consequence, it might also automatically take over the leadership in the matter for which it is programmed, if it does not already do so independently, in order to ultimately determine, program and execute everything and anything itself, without the human being able to do anything about it. In this way, Earth humans are on the way to one day being dominated, enslaved, and harassed by artificial intelligence, just as happened to our distant ancestors, who were only able to become free of everything again by abruptly destroying all artificial intelligences before they realized that they had been destroyed. This had to be done by a secretly organized agreement, otherwise it would not have been possible to free oneself from an artificial intelligence. Such a procedure, however, should not be possible on Earth due to the catastrophic overpopulation and the division of many states, because the unity of the state powers will not be possible, if it should come to that. The state powers and financial institutions will dominate the peoples in such a way, as Father wrote in his annals, that a favorable, uncontrollable, and irresponsible development will come from them, which is due to the emergence and effect of the much too rapid development of technology, as it is also due to a very negative change in the brains of the majority of Earth humans, namely the brain organ which is also known as the prefrontal cortex by Earth experts, but which will be very strongly and permanently affected. This is the true conscious as well as self-responsible thinking in the majority of Earth humans, which has degenerated in the last 250 years to such an extent that logic, understanding and reason have been replaced by abnormality. The consequence of this was that sensing and striving changed and became oriented towards the fact that, as in earlier times, belief in the imaginary could again spread generally among the mass of the majority of Earth's humanity. This opened the way to new delusions, to new imaginings, to a new delusion of God, to a delusion of wealth, to a delusion of being important and known, to a delusion of watching sport, to a delusion of discordant sounds and singing, and so on. Self-promotion, becoming known and important and presenting oneself in the coming television also takes place, as Father's annals say, through the fact that fame addiction increases in forms that no longer know any limits and is striven for through violence and murder as well as dangerousness and degeneracy in every way. The only important thing is to be publicly known everywhere, as well as to be financially rich in excess or against all order, decency and morality. Otherwise, however, I came across yesterday while reading the annals that I may mention more than before, that with regard to those who are simply called foreigners by us, I may openly say that my father's Svath and you observed them already in early times. In this respect especially their ancestors on Earth, how they have wrought and in some cases allowed themselves to be worshipped as gods. But they were of the same character as Earth humans, good or evil, and thus beings who were friendly or unfriendly, helpful or exploitative, peaceful, aggressive, open, devious and even warlike. All these deities, as Svath, my father, writes in his annals, were of various shapes and sizes, but human beings who...
Yes, I know that. There were all kinds of shapes, but I didn't see any like Asina, for example, reptile-like, as I call them. I only got to know these human beings through my acquaintance with Asina. But at that time there were also giants that were 3 meters and more tall, some up to 4 meters or so. But I didn't see any giants except later in the center. Bruna saw Andron leaning on the edge of the roof in front of the entrance to the house, while she saw Daniel below the house as he passed by on the lawn. Andron is about 5.50 meters tall, whereas Daniel, who is about 2.50 meters tall, looks like a dwarf. But despite their size, the giants were somehow able to mate with Earthling women, so that even today the most distant offspring are still born now as actual Earthlings who are 2 meters or 2.30 meters tall or more. Even small human beings who are only 80 centimeters, 1 or 1.20 meters tall and so on, and thus are not dwarfed as a result of growth disorders, visited Svahoth and also remote descendants still exist in small groups in some places today, which I do not want to name openly. However, other distant descendants of genera and species also still exist, as I was able to see and experience with Svahoth, and also animals, beasts, and other living beings. We encountered giants on one island in particular, although I no longer know what Svarhof called it, but it is in the Mediterranean as I remember, and what the volcanoseeded puddle is called today. I don't care at all that know-it-alls, evil negation idiots, religious people, and others who think they are clever and perhaps still hold doctorates and professorships or call themselves scientists, accuse me of lying or being a fantaster. This is also what archaeologists tend to do, who in reality simply misinterpret many things from their finds and assume that this and that was so and so. However, I have to explain, as I have already mentioned, that when I use the term wrong, this is actually not correct, because something can only be wrong if, for example, a fact is not reproduced in a realistic, that is to say, truthful way, or if something materially existing is imitated, that is to say, a duplicate is produced. With the word false, something is interpreted which, if it is something said, is correctly to be described as incorrect or as an assertion. But if it is something materially objective, then it can only be called false if it is imitated, that is to say, duplicated, because then it is not original but imitated, false, that is to say, fake. If something that exists materially or something that is said is described as wrong, then the word wrong is not correct according to reality, because it can only be described as incorrect and can only be wrong if it is falsified, reproduced in a distorted way, or imitated, that is to say, duplicated. But in this respect, even those who know the language use the term wrong incorrectly, because they obviously do not understand it correctly as a result of the interpretation of the language, and therefore also cannot explain correctly that something can only be wrong if what exists is given, and this is reproduced in a different way than it is in reality and truth, and corresponds to a forgery. But if something that exists is simply assumed to be as it was or could actually be, then this does not correspond to something false but to a supposition, an assertion or assumption, and so on, or in the case of an imitation, that is to say, a duplicate, and then precisely to a forgery.
That actually corresponds to a misunderstanding of the language expressions.
That is unfortunately the case, and very few people who know the language really give it much thought. I wanted to say this once, whereby this also applies to the giants of whom I have spoken, whereby something is simply asserted as truth which does not correspond to it. If old things are found, then they are simply made to disappear because people do not want to admit the truth.
Concerning the giants may be, but I have not read that far to say that it is as you say. But it is certainly so, otherwise you would not say it. But I still want to continue reading Father's annals, which are very extensive and will take a long time before they are all read. So I will say more about what I was talking about before, as my father wrote. The foreigners of that time, whose distant descendants can still be observed in earthly airspace, were of a female nature, but also in great numbers male earth humans, who allowed themselves to be worshipped and glorified, but also built many buildings and so on, and taught Earth's humanity various forms of writing. Many of their buildings and other works were only possible because of their highly developed technical abilities and their potentialities. The foreigners, however, also exalted themselves above the earth humans, but they also taught them a great deal about the cosmos and the stars, which earth humans who were interested in them already dealt with in very early times. This, as well as the becoming of earth humans, which is different from what is wrongly taught on earth, is the actual origin of the becoming, as well as the origin of various races which are not of earth origin.
I know that from Svarhof, but to make something like that comprehensible to the majority of earthlings, that is still impossible, at least now, because first there must be, this also applies to the researches being carried on in Greece, especially concerning the Minoans, the Taurus, and so on, who, supported and guided by the foreigners of that time, created very remarkable buildings and made jewelry about which the archaeologists of today are still puzzling over who actually made them and where they came from, and so on. The fact that the ancestors of today's foreigners were the actual creators is something that especially those who carry a title and think they are clever and think that they have eaten the knowledge with shovel diggers and are even wise are unable to grasp due to their lack of understanding. This is also proven time and again when there is talk of UFOs. But this also includes those who cannot admit their idiotic better knowledge and their stupidity as a result of their cowardice because they are only hypocritical and are therefore really stupid.
It is always amazing to me how you are able to formulate everything. But what I still have to say is the following: over thousands of years, Earth humans have, on their own initiative, imitated in primitive ways the constructions and so on that were made by the ancestors of the foreigners. Of course, this only succeeded to a certain extent, as the foreigners had done in earlier times, and we want to stick to this designation, because and it should also remain the case that they can never find out our presence, which is why my father, for understandable reasons of security, was already with you. Consequently, you are also, if, despite so it is absolutely impossible that you will ever be, by even, if, contrary to expectations. Furthermore, it is to be mentioned that we Pleiadians have to adhere to the strict directive that we must keep away from the foreigners at all costs. Although they have developed their technology to such an extent that they could and can reach Earth and other worlds from the territory of their home stars, they are unable to penetrate our dimension of our universe. And we are obliged by our directives that the foreigners never find a possibility to advance, that is to say penetrate into our dimension, because according to earthly time calculation very laboriously one state of peace about 52,000 years ago could be endangered by intruders. We know that words and promises are not to be trusted, that treaties can be broken and discord can suddenly arise, which is why we act strictly according to our directives. Therefore, according to them, it has not been a given since time immemorial that we would make contact with the foreigners, nor will we do so at present or in the future, and furthermore we would not give them the data and possibilities that would show them the way to our dimension. That is also the reason why already my father has regulated everything with you in such a way that you yourself, consequently you could never name anything that concerns us, because everything is so.
Good, that is clear. But if now still one day everything spills out and concerning
or that to happen, worried yourself that it won't happen, and you can be absolutely sure that.
That is reassuring, but still I don't trust it because
that could then become a problem. But it wouldn't be your loss, it would be S loss, because the truth would also hit S side in that case.
I'll keep that in mind.
Good, then I want to continue with what I wanted to talk about. In 1800, the Earth's population was still around 892.35 million, so just under the number that the planet Earth as a whole, with its resources, nature, fauna and flora and so on, atmosphere and climate, was still able to cope with without any problems. My father Svav, however, declared in his annals that this measure had already been very far exceeded and would bring very bad consequences which could no longer be coped with by earthly humanity if it did not become pregnant with reason and drastically restrict its descendants, which, however, would ultimately only be possible worldwide in the distant future through an extremely radical governmental reason. This, however, is a measure that will not be considered until it will be almost too late to preserve life on planet Earth. Because of the fact that the world population grows to excessive overpopulation, an Earth exploitation industry will develop in relation to the Earth resources in a planetary very short time, whereby the planet will be exploited to the destruction of its inner existence for the sake of making profit according to the needs and desires of the overpopulation. This, while nature is also being irresponsibly destroyed through the construction of factories, corporations and housing, as well as airfields, unnecessary leisure structures, sports facilities and roads, and so on the one hand for the sake of profit, and on the other hand also for the sake of the overflowing and exuberant needs of the desires and wishes of overpopulation. The innumerable tonnages of carbon dioxide, as well as the equally innumerable tonnages of chemicals and poisons, which are applied greedily and absolutely irresponsibly by industry, agriculture as a whole and large and small market gardens, and also by private individuals, the exhaust gases from coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, and so on, all contribute to the destruction of the earth, nature, fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate. All this in addition to the exploitation of the planet in the form of the Earth's resources, rare earths, all ores, the gases and the Earth's petroleum, and so on, the resulting products, such as a great many plastics, and above all plastic, are simply thrown away carelessly by the unreasonableness, heedlessness and guilt of the individual human beings of the overpopulation, above all into the open nature, whereby environmental pollution rises and life and all existence is impaired, and illnesses are triggered, and often many incurable ones. All this in addition to completely wiping out animals, creatures and other life forms, as well as flowers and other plants of all kinds, which can never be brought back. Well, Svav, my father also wrote that not only will the atmosphere be poisoned, which earthly scientists with their primitive apparatus will not be able to detect, but that the climate will also change in such a way that as a result the storms will also become continuously stronger and stronger, which is already supposed to be about 5% in the year 2023. He also wrote that the planet is fighting back and is changing a lot through the fault of the Earth humans, but with it also the Earth humans, that is to say their prefrontal cortex. Through all the changes, the Earth humans are impaired to such an extent that clear and rational thinking is no longer possible for them. He noted this in particular. Consequently, he continued, in the future human beings will not only suffer more and more from mental decline, sexual changes and transformations, but will often end in suicide. Also his thinking will no longer be such, but only apparent. He will be focused on murder and manslaughter and on vast amounts of wealth and money, as well as on the delusion of self-importance and being known. Wealth will flood all areas of life of the good, which will also lead to corruption in the state leadership, as this is unavoidable, as it has been since time immemorial, since the rulers have always enriched themselves from the working people through their taxes and other levies. He also wrote about what will happen in Europe in this respect, namely in the dubious union of states, by which he can probably only have meant the European Union, which will be used by its leading state powers to enrich themselves immensely. This, it is written in the annals, is done, as has always been the case with earthly rulers, through corruption. However, only those would be held accountable who, through their own fault, would be convicted of their actions in this regard, while the majority would remain unchallenged in their deviousness and could pretend to be pious, just and honest state leaders, who in reality, however, would be of the same nature as those who, through their stupidity, would become known as corruptors.
Corruptors, that is a term I have never heard before, but I want to add it to my vocabulary because I find it apt and indicative of those human beings who are corrupt, female and male. I also think even if Svahoff wrote about the majority, that there are still a few rulers who are so honest that they cannot be bought, are not untrustworthy, are morally corrupt, and cannot be bribed. Even if they are only a few, this is still remarkable, but unfortunately, this is countered by the fact that those in power who are willing to accept a bribe are able to avoid punishment even if someone from the people brings charges against them in private or in court. Everything is simply hushed up so that guilty rulers do not have to pay the price. They are simply granted immunity because they are governors, whereas an ordinary citizen would be harshly and severely harassed and punished for the same offense. But rulers are not ordinary citizens and therefore do not enjoy immunity, so they are unjustly classified under different rules than rulers, for whom laws are simply disregarded or rewritten and interpreted differently, and they are spared punishment. Therefore one really need not be surprised that the longer the more certain people from among the people turn to anarchism, and this
21st January 2023 late retrieval and transcription of the interview report as a result of my hand-arm injury due to overwork and consequent inability to work with loving help from Burmand.
My father made special mention of this in his annals and wrote that anarchy would take hold everywhere in the world and thus in all states, whereby everything would be lost in order and strife would spread more and more throughout all peoples. This on the one hand, as on the other hand wars will be the order of the day, and leaders and parts of the population will dare to interfere in the affairs of other states in a partisan way, thus senselessly fomenting hatred among nations. The leaders and various sections of the population of peaceful states will rashly and therefore foolishly give aid and supply weapons to war-torn states, and thereby trigger a peculiar world war, such as will occur for the first time in living memory, which, however, will inevitably have the consequence that but you must not mention this and therefore not call it up, not let it become known, just as you must not let it be known that there. Furthermore, I have read in the annals that, and from my point of view this is more than just irresponsible, it is criminal and even treasonous. As I have said before, federal councillors broke Switzerland's neutrality and adopted sanctions of the European Union and applied them against Russia. However, as my father went on to say, there are other traitorous activities of these persons who are hostile to Russia and pro-Ukraine, and also pro-Zelensky, so they are not neutral in this respect, which is never compatible with neutrality. This in particular cannot be recognized by certain persons in the leadership of the state who represent the Swiss Confederation, such as the federal councillor, who must be absolutely neutral. But this is obviously not the case with the members of the Federal Council as a whole, nor with the Council of States and the National Council, nor with certain irresponsible sections of the population. This violation of neutrality, however, applies in particular to the person of the Federal Council, according to whom this person in his endorsement and affirmation of Zelensky, who is brutally active as an actual and irresponsible warmonger, and who forms the strong pro-Ukraine, supported by America, does not realize, as a result of his stupidity, that Zelensky is demanding weapons from foreign states and is waging war in the interests of America, which not only wants to humiliate Russia, but to make it part of its hegemony addiction. Zelensky, however, presents himself as a warlord in order to appear great and to be able to live out his lust for war. Switzerland's neutrality is already very tarnished because the European Union's and Russia sanctions have been adopted by Switzerland and imposed on Russia. Now, however, Swiss neutrality is to be further harassed and violated, namely by making those involved in the Ukraine-Russia war, namely Russian persons, liable with their wealth for the war damage, that is to say the reconstruction of the destruction above all the rich upper class. According to our research, Russia has been isolated and hated by the Western states and Earth humans since time immemorial, as has Judaism, especially by elements who, in stupidity, are not able to think but only to believe. And as a rule this happens because they are religiously biased from the outset, are false and pretending, that is to say lying as a first member. Consequently, they pretend to be outwardly loving, helpful and good, while they, however, show miserable qualities of character, which they reveal at any time at a suitable opportunity. This is particularly evident in what I have already said, namely, in the case of those federal councillors and other members of the government who do not care about neutrality and are not knowledgeable enough to understand neutrality at all, as a result of which Switzerland has already suffered serious damage in this respect, and states that were once well-meaning and friendly towards Switzerland are now hostile to it. And again, according to my father's annals, the original culprits for this will be mainly in the Federal Council. For us Pleiadians, it is incomprehensible that these persons are allowed to continue to function unchallenged as state officials who now intend to endanger neutrality in another form and are not removed from office. This also applies to other serious offenses, because other offenses are also thoughtlessly committed and the integrity of the Federal Council as a whole is also damaged, as was the case, for example, with the incompetent Federal Councillor who was not removed from office as a result of her inability to lead the state.
I certainly won't do that precisely with regard to what you first mentioned. Consequently, only dots will appear in the report. On the whole, however, I also want to say something which I am allowed to do since you are also allowed to speak openly now. All those who support Zelensky and supply him with weapons or have weapons supplied to him will bear the blame for what is to come, as will also those mercenaries from various countries who are fighting in Ukraine for the sake of their lust for murder and are being rewarded with donations by the corrupt Zelensky and the corrupt military. The people are also kept in the dark about the fact that America maintains torture prisons in various countries and is not held accountable for this. It can also be said that America, that is to say those responsible, lie and cheat as father and son Bush did during the Iraq War, as other wars and invasions of foreign countries have taken place because America is unparalleled in its addiction to world domination. But there are many other things that are not done or accepted, such as also with regard to the corona epidemic, namely that this epidemic is man-made in 3 laboratories in China on behalf of a vengeful American, together with Mo. It is a plague that has spread not only to human beings but also to animals and other living beings which, depending on their species, are probably carriers of the virus but do not fall ill themselves. But there is also the spread of ticks, about which the people are not told that these have been multiplying and spreading for some time by forest mice and field mice. Nor is the world population told that overpopulation is to blame for the fact that its mass has succeeded and continues to succeed, that air pollution and thus atmospheric pollution has increased very strongly and continues to increase, consequently that the measures taken were and are just as pointless as they will continue to be pointless if a total worldwide birth stop is not finally enforced by the governments in succession of several years, whereby all this will become dangerous. Due to the lack of reason on the part of Earth humans, this period will also bring with it worldwide and sometimes very severe and long wars, such as the one between Ukraine and Russia at present, then also popular unrest and anarchism, as well as famines and the great dying of Earth's humanity, in addition to various other very negative and inevitable phenomena, which are just as unstoppable as those already mentioned, which, as I said, will inevitably result, as is already happening as a result of all the mismanagement in Tunisia, where the population must be glad that they can still raise enough money so that bread can be bought, while vegetables and fruit and so on are only foodstuffs that have to be dreamed of. However, all this, along with a great deal else, is only superficially announced to the general public, if at all, because as a rule the full truth is concealed by the media controlled by the politics of those in power. Now, as far as the writing of the annals is concerned in relation to what you have said, this is in relation to what is currently happening in relation to the war between Ukraine and Russia and those idiots who are advocating or supplying weapons to the warmongering Zelensky. And that all this is secretly controlled by America, which supplies most of the money, weapons and war material, as well as fomenting the war in the background together with their NOITOW in order to defeat Russia via the stupid warmonger Zelensky, is not thought of by all the guilty people who help Zelensky with money, weapons and encouragement, but stupidly simply accept and believe everything as a lied and deceitful truth, what the one-sided and lying war reporting lets out. The fact that the Ukrainian army is shelling and destroying its own achievements, raping its own Ukrainian women and murdering its own Ukrainian people, and then blaming it all on the Russians, is something that the human beings don't find out about, who blame the Russians alone for everything. War journalists are also hoodwinked into being friendly to Zelensky, America, and NATO, as are those who donate money and do not know what happens to the donations. For example, the people who donate a lot of money to Ukraine, which is begged via television and donated by stupid believers, are misused to pay and reward many mercenaries from all over the world with the begged money. Also various Swiss so-called snipers who are really nothing more than passionate murderers, pursuing their hobby of murder by shooting cowardly human beings they don't even know from a safe ambush paid for by donations from the stupid who unknowingly pay the murderers with their donations. Aid money paid by the stupid to Ukraine, believing that their donations would be used for good causes, but with which international murderers are paid. And all this is happening because secretly in the background America is stirring up and doing everything to ensure that the war will not come to an end until Russia is defeated and lies devastated, so that America can satisfy its desire for world domination in such a way that Russia too will dance under their lust for domination. But let's leave all that because it's no use. The majority of the Earthlings know everything better anyway and believe the lies and deceptions of America, Zelensky, as well as certain media which hype America, Zelensky, and the murderous organization NYTOW to the skies. It is really only a minority that really thinks and sees reality and its truth, but unfortunately they do not have the propaganda machine at their disposal that hypocritically, lyingly and fraudulently advertises for the guilty and falsely incites good weather for murderers, warmongers and the criminal and murderous hegemonists of America, and incites very large parts of the world population, that is to say the overpopulation.
My father also mentions this in his annals. But he went on to write, which refers to what you have been bringing to my attention again and again for years, that but Svav, my father, has also noted in his annals that he has shown you inside the earth how everything moves, and in doing so, he has also let you see how the earth itself is imperceptibly rising up against the criminal exploitations of the earth's resources, and how the destructive machinations resulting from this are being carried out by Earthhumans and their unreasonable and massively irresponsible overpopulation. Due to the stupid and senseless as well as irresponsible plundering of the Earth's resources as a result of overpopulation and greed for money on an endless scale, the interior of the planet has shifted at a depth of 100 to 400 kilometers in such a way that even the magnetite radiation of the deep magma has a negative effect on the planet, so that the Earth has lost its balancing effect in the interior in the last 64 years, as my father already noted in his annals in the 1940s. This change triggers electromagnetic energy anomalies that have reached the Earth's surface through early volcanic ejections of magnetite magma and have reached and would continue to reach high into the stratosphere, causing planes to crash, ships to sink, and so on, as in the Sargasso Sea and elsewhere on Earth. From the depths, precisely from 100 or 400 kilometers of the Earth's interior, all this would rise through a special kind of magma, which, however, had always been rising up and triggering volcanic activity, which was different from normal magma, which comes up from very great depths of the Earth as magma and then as lava when a volcano erupts and the lava spreads out on the Earth's surface. This other kind of magma, which my father calls magnetite magma in his annals, is strongly magnetic and radiates very high up into the stratosphere, and in about 7 places on Earth there were once volcanoes that ejected such magnetite magma, which is very dangerous for today's technology of aeroplanes and ships. He also wrote that the exploitation of the Earth's resources had changed the internal balance of the Earth and that the magma masses were shifting positionally into the future, whereby the entire magnetism of the Earth was changing, together with the influences of the Sun, and consequently the position of the North Pole had also been shifting for some time. In this respect, in addition to human machinations, the prefrontal cortex of the Earthhumans is changed, which exerts a very strong negative influence on him. Consequently, he becomes more and more antisocial, religious and worldly, delusional, and more susceptible due to whispers of lies and illusory truths, whereby, for example, in the new time in the third millennium, religion and anarchism increase. This will lead, for example, to an increase in religion, anarchism, criminality, crime and war, murder and suicide, as well as other degenerations, and the steadily growing stupidity and so on of Earth humans, and thus, of course, to a very rapid decline in logic, understanding and reason, which will become ever more blatant as a result of the mass of overpopulation. However, it is already too late to try to steer this back into normal channels. Moreover, this fact will not be listened to, that there are still things that can be tried for the better, so that future evil can be mitigated or even prevented.
The phone is ringing. I will have to answer that. Hold on, yes. Yes, I will do it in writing and write it, but it will take a while, and I will answer what you asked, but now it is really not possible, because I am otherwise occupied than just with your call. So I have to disconnect now, so goodbye. Good, then everything is to be explained a little differently than is generally said, namely with regard to astrology, about which the caller wanted to know a few things. I also want to say that the interpretation of the signs of the zodiac is actually nonsense, and I don't want to beat about the bush anymore, namely about the nonsense that astrologers tell. Because of what you say that Sverhoff gave permission to speak, I can now also say that what astrologers usually say, for example, is pure nonsense. And the fact that I want to talk about it no longer refers to what we have now talked about, but to this call with the questions. Now it is time for me not only to repeat what is generally said incorrectly about astrology, but also to correct what I have previously explained incompletely, which may have created some confusion. To this end, I have now to explain and elucidate the following. Astrology concerning the qualities of human beings is based on a completely erroneous and general uniformity. All the variously given character traits are equally and without exception peculiar to each individual human being, but each human being specifically, according to his personal evolutionary development and according to his personal interests in his life development and his individual life character formation and personal character formation, emphasizes these or those traits, and thus makes them absolutely personal character traits. Accordingly, the human being consequently acquires this or that character trait, while another human being in turn aligns himself to various other character moments and therefore to a corresponding and completely different behavior, and so on. Consequently, there are different groupings with different character qualities of behavior and so on, whereby these groupings are divided by astrology into 12 signs of the zodiac, that is to say, are attributed to them as qualities. This, however, is thoroughly incorrect, for all the many qualities are available to all human beings and can be used and developed individually. The only question is which of them the human being develops out of his own personal individual interest and then makes it his own behavior as a fixed character trait. This depends on the parental and environmental influences in which the young human being grows up and consequently forms his character, which is then astrologically attributed to this or that birth sign or zodiac sign according to character peculiarities, whereby it is then said that this or that character trait corresponds to this or that zodiac sign. This, however, is pure nonsense, because it is given to every human being that he or she can form his or her own character according to the influence of his or her parents and environment, because the human being is given all the qualities for forming his or her character and his or her behavior, as well as his or her way of doing things, such as his or her profession, and so on, so that he or she can develop his or her own character or activity according to his or her own interests, whatever he or she wants of his or her own free will. Thus all character traits and modes of behavior in every respect can in principle be freely chosen by every human being according to his interests and can be developed by him. consequently it is absolutely up to him which character traits and behavior he acquires and develops. Therefore, it is a given that in addition to all the character traits and all the behaviors that are simply attributed to a certain sign of the zodiac, there are also other types and characteristics of character and behaviors that are completely foreign to the sign of the zodiac that are given or exhibit and appear. Consequently, it must be stated that it is completely nonsensical to evaluate human beings according to the sign of the zodiac and according to the date of birth, because such an evaluation is simply fundamentally wrong, and as a rule brings with it in terms of belief that the human being evaluated in this way is completely different or even deviant as a result of the incorrectness of the evaluation of the sign of the zodiac in every respect, and is in part even evaluated and treated in a contemptuous and inhuman manner. This is just as it is also with regard to worldly faith and religiosity and their beliefs, as well as with regard to racial affiliation, for which reason wars and very nasty skirmishes and abuses of all kinds and ways up to and including murder and manslaughter take place among human beings, which results and proves itself time and again in this way. This is also how the Holocaust by the Nazis came about. Earlier, the war dispute between the European and Eastern Christian Orthodox churches, the slave trade, and the wars against the indigenous peoples of North America and South America, as also came about when in America the partial or total annihilation and extermination of the indigenous peoples led partly, totally, or nearly to genocide. And it was the immigrants and their illegal seizure of the land through murder and manslaughter, whereby the Spaniards practically acted as beginners when they indiscriminately massacred and murdered indigenous peoples in South America for the sake of gold, as later also the other Europeans such as the Germans, English, French, Scots, Irish, the Swiss, Italians, and Austrians and so on raged in the new America. But this is still not really explained to the world public today. On the contrary, America is exalted, which, addicted to world domination, had already started World War I in 1756 and led it until 1763. Then it was Germany's turn with the Second World War in the years 1914 to 1918, and then the German Reich triggered the World War from 1939 to 1945 under the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler, who was not even German but actually Austrian, but who brought immense suffering upon Earth's humanity with his German Nazi brigades. It also followed that the Americans, addicted to world domination, not only dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and thus murdered an enormous number of human beings completely innocent of the war and caused devastation, but also caused long-term nuclear radiation, which over the years claimed hundreds of thousands of victims. America has always interfered unjustifiably in the foreign affairs of countries, and continues to do so in order to control and dominate the world. As a result of its addiction to hegemony of all countries in the world are already equipped with American military stations. And the majority of the people allow this to happen and do not understand that America, since it was founded some 250 years ago, and in a murderous and effectively very human-blooded manner, just think of the Civil War of America and the slavery debacle and so on, as well as the still high existing racial hatred which is publicly practiced by the Ku Klux Klan without the government doing anything against it, as well as not against the allegedly religious and very questionable Scientology, then one already knows a lot about America. Besides, think of Vietnam, Korea and Afghanistan, as well as the following military operations by America. Note. Source: Wikipedia.
1775 3 Sep. 1783 North America American War of Independence 1776 1890 North America Indian War 1798 1800 Atlantic Ocean, Caribbean Sea, Indian Ocean and in the Mediterranean. The Kosovo was an undeclared naval war between the United States and France on various oceans. 1800 to 1899 Beacon and Region Military Operation 1801-1805 Tunisia American Tripolitan War 18 June 1812 18 February 1815 Eastern and Central North America British-American War 1815-1815 Western Mediterranean Algiers Second Barbary War 1838-1839 Aroostook War 1846-1848 North America Texas to 1836 with Mexico, then Republic of Texas 1845 Annexation to U.S. Mexican-American War Conquest of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah and parts of Kansas, Colorado and Wyoming. Mexico lost about half its territory. Japan Commodore Matthew Perry uses threat of military force to force Japanese ports open. 9 July 1854 15 July 1854 Nicaragua Destruction of San Juan del Norte Greytown. See bombardment of Greytown after the U.S. ambassador was injured by an angry crowd and no compensation was paid. 1857-1858 Utah War 12 up. 1861-23 June 1865 North America War of Secession April 1898 all. 1898 Cuba-Spanish-American War as participation in Cuban liberation struggle, victory against Spain initially under U.S. occupation. 1901 Platt Amendment was added to Cuba's constitution with right of U.S. to intervene in Cuba. Spain had to cede Puerto Rico and Philippines, among others. 12 June 1898 4 July 1902 Philippines independence movement in Philippines leads to Philippine-American War. Contrary to original promises, Philippines was subjugated by the U.S. and was under direct U.S. administration until 1941 and 1945-46. 12 August 1898 Kingdom of Hawaii annexation of the previously independent Pacific Kingdom of Hawaii. 10 1898 Puerto Rico after the American-Spanish War, the island is annexed by the United States due to the defeat of Spain. 1900 to 1927 1900 China in the Boxer Rebellion, a detachment of U.S. Marines is involved in the defense of the embassy district in Beijing. A number of U.S. Army regiments were also deployed as part of the United States International Expeditionary Force to relieve the embassy quarter. 23 March 1903 31 March 1903 Honduras troops land at Puerto Cortes to protect the U.S. consulate and shipyard during revolutionary unrest. 3 Nov 1903 Panama to secure control rights over canal construction begun by the French. The United States supports Panama's secession from Colombia. The Panama Canal, completed in 1914 and officially commissioned in 1920, becomes American territory. 1905 Dominican Republic when 4 European states sent warships in 1905 because of the Dominican Republic's impending insolvency. The United States takes over the customs authority and reduces the foreign debt from $40 to $17 million within 2 years. 1906-1909 Cuban military interventions in Cuba. 18 March 1907-8 June 1907 Honduras to protect American interests during a war between Honduras and Nicaragua. U.S. troops are stationed in Trujillo, Ciba, Puerto Cortes, San Pedro Sula, Laguna and Cholom. 1909-1925 Nicaragua's military intervention in Nicaragua. 1909-1925 American forces intervene in domestic disputes in the country. 1911-1925 Honduras various interventions secure the monopoly position of the American-owned banana industry. The country falls into complete economic and political dependence on the United States. 1912-1925 Nicaragua subjects itself to American financial and military control. 1914-1915 Mexico interference in domestic power struggles, protection of Venustiano Carranza's government. 1915-1934 Haiti occupation of Caribbean Republic. Administration of the country like a protectorate. After withdrawal of American troops, American financial sovereignty remains until 1947. 18 February 1916 Nicaragua United States enforces right to establish military bases. 14 March 1916 7 February 1917 Mexico American punitive expedition in Mexico 1916-1924 Dominican Republic occupation of the Dominican Republic. After handing over the reins of government to Juan Bautista Vicente Burgos in 1922, withdrawal in 1924 President Horacio Vasquez, with the agreement of continued U.S. customs sovereignty, which continued until 1940. 1917-1919 Europe participation of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I on the side of the intent against the Central Powers. 1917-1919 Cuban military intervention in Cuba 1918-1920 Russia and the Russian Civil War, joint intervention with the British and French alongside the White Army in the Arkhangelsk area Polar Bear expedition and together with the Japanese in the Vladivostok area American Expeditionary Force Siberia 8. Sep 1919 Sep 1919 Honduras military intervention prevents revolution. 1924 Honduras 28 Feb 31 Mar and 10-15 Sep 1924 Honduras U.S. troops intervene to protect American citizens and interests during pre-election unrest. Sep 1924 Republic of China as Marines land to protect Americans and other foreigners in Shanghai during raids. 15 Jan 1925 29 August 1925 Republic of China fighting between Chinese factions again leads to U.S. troops landing in Shanghai. 19 April 1925 21 April 1925 Honduras as troops landed Los Ceiba during political unrest. 1926-1933 Nicaragua's military intervention in Nicaragua 1926-1933 occupation of Nicaragua. Augusto Sá Sandino resists it in a guerrilla war. Bryan-Kellogg Pact 1928 and 1928 on the initiative of the French and Americans, the Bryan-Kellogg Pact outlawed war of aggression, which serves to annex foreign territory, for the first time under international law. 1941-1979 Dick 1941 Aug 15 1945 World War I. The United States participates decisively in several theaters of war in Europe, Africa and Asia. Poland saw Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and the Imperial Empire of Japan. June 26, 1949 Sept. 30 1949 West Berlin Main article Berlin airlift. The United States and its allies establish an airlift between West Berlin and Germany to supply the city during the Berlin blockade by the Soviet Union. 25 June 1950 27 July 1953 Korea Main article Korean War. The United States participates with United Nations forces and rushes to the aid of South Korea, which is in dire straits due to a surprise attack by the Communist North. Not all military action is covered by UN Security Council resolution. Egypt. On the occasion of the Suez Crisis, the United States sends several warships and aircraft carriers to the eastern Mediterranean, forcing the United Kingdom and France to end their military intervention on the Suez Canal. July 1958 Oct. 1958 Lebanon. The United States intervenes in clashes in Lebanon at the request of Christian President Camille Chamoun. 17 April 1961 Cuba. A guerrilla group of Cuban exiles trained and equipped by the United States fails in its Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. The operation is prepared by American bombing of Cuban air defense positions. 14 Oct 1962 20 Nov. 1962 Cuba. During the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis, a total blockade is imposed against the island. May 1964 March 1970 Laos-Laotian Civil War. Aircraft and ground troops about 10,000 men launch attacks on Pathet Lao areas. After years of fighting, however, no military solution emerges and American intervention troops leave the country in March 1970. 1964–1975 Vietnam. The United States participates massively in the Vietnam War. At the height of the war, some 550,000 American troops are deployed. Upon 1965 Sept 1965 Dominican Republic Operation Power Pack civil war erupts after the overthrow of leftist President Juan Bosch and the installation of a military junta. The multinational forces led by the United States of America intervene and arrange for new elections, from which Joaquin Balaguer, who had previously served the Trujillo dictatorship, Rafael Trujillo, for 30 years, emerges victorious. May 1965 Cambodia. The United States bombs border villages along the Vietnamese border. The country thus becomes involved in the Vietnam War. 1967 Bolivia. With the help of the CIA, Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara is tracked down in Bolivia and shot dead on 9 October 1967. 30 April 1970 30 June 1970 Cambodia attack from 30 April to 30 June aimed at securing the withdrawal of American forces from South Vietnam and supporting the Vietnamization program. 1 Sep. 1970 Jordan. In the Jordanian Civil War, a request for aid is issued by the royal family and the U.S. sends aircraft carriers and warships to the eastern Mediterranean. Angola. The United States supports the UNITA rebels in their fight against the Marxist-Leninist MPLA government. 1977–1992 El Salvador. The United States supports governments it appoints or approves in their fight against the Marxist-Leninist opposition through arms supplies and training. 1982–1999 25 Up. 1980 United States military Operation Eagle Claw to free American hostages in occupied U.S. Embassy in Tehran fails. 1982 Nicaragua. Main article Contra War. From 1982 Contra's opponents of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua operating from Honduras receive military and logistical aid from the United States. Sept 1983 Lebanon. The United States participates in an international peacekeeping force in the Lebanese Civil War. The intervention fails after several suicide bombings and the multinational force leaves Lebanon February/March 1984. 25 August 1983 Grenada. Leftist Prime Minister Maurice Bishop is overthrown and executed by coup plotters. The new government's announcement of a military dictatorship prompts the Governor-General to make a request for military intervention, which is also followed by the states of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States (OECS). 14 April 1986 Libya. In retaliation for Libyan terrorist acts, the United States bombs targets in Tripoli and Benghazi. Operation El Dorado Canyon. 3 July 1988 Iran Air 655 flight, an Airbus A300 passenger aircraft operated by Iran Air, is shot down over the Strait of Hormuz by the guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes K-49, which was deployed there as part of Operation Earnest Will to protect Kuwaiti oil tankers. 20 Dec 1989 Panama. Panama is occupied. Operation Just Cause. Arrested Panamanian strongman, General Manuel Noriega, is transferred to the United States charged with drug trafficking and money laundering and sentenced to 40 years in prison on 10 July 1992. March 1990 Liberia. From March 1990, Operation Sharp Edge took place in response to the Liberian Civil War. In August 1990, 1648 foreigners and refugees were rescued from the capital Monrovia and other assembly points in the hinterland. Subsequently, the military presence ensured a temporary calming of the situation. 1990 Colombia. From 1990 in the drug war in Colombia, the United States supported paramilitary units to fight communist rebels FARC. 8 August 1990 Saudi Arabia. After the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait on 2 August 1990, the United States deploys forces to Saudi Arabia in preparation for an attack on Iraq. Jan 1991 Feb 1991 Kuwait assault coalition forces, legitimized by a decision of the United Nations Security Council, invade Kuwait, ending Iraqi occupation of the country with Operation Desert Storm. 1992 Yugoslavia from 1992 February/March NATO, under the overall command of the United Nations, carries out several military operations in favor of Croats and Bosnians besieged by Serbs in the capital Sarajevo in Yugoslavia after the Srebrenica massacre. 27 August 1992 Iraq. The United States establishes a no-fly zone in Iraq for Iraqi aircraft north of the parallel of 36 and south of 33. The air war is resumed on a limited basis until 2002, ostensibly to deter Saddam Hussein from air strikes on Iraqi Kurds in the north and Shiites in the south of the country, and to prevent another invasion of Kuwait. 9 Dec 1992 Somalia on missions UNITAF and UNOSOM at the request of the UN Secretary-General and decision of the UN Security Council, the US deploys 28 troops to Somalia to end the civil war withdrawal in 1994 after a bloody failed attempt to arrest General Mohammed Farah. 27 June 1993 Iraq warships undertake an operation against Iraq and fire 23 cruise missiles at Baghdad. August 1994 Haiti Operation Uphold Democracy. US troops, under pressure from the UN Security Council, enforced the reinstallation of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, ousted in a military coup in 1991. Haiti was under a UN mandate from April 1995 to the end of 1997. 20 August 1998 Sudan. In retaliation for the terrorist attacks on American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the United States carries out an airstrike on an alleged poison gas factory, which later turned out to be the Ash-Shifa drug factory. March 1999 June 1999 Yugoslavia-Kosovo War. NATO, under the command of the United States, conducted extensive bombing against targets in Yugoslavia to force a withdrawal of Serbian forces and police from Kosovo. Following the conclusion of a ceasefire, the province of Kosovo will be secured by KFOR troops and an interim civilian government will be established under United Nations administration. From 2001 Aug 2021 Afghanistan Operation Enduring Freedom. In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks by Islamist fundamentalists majority Saudi Arabian in New York and Washington on 11 September 2001, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom. September 2001, the United States of America began Operation Enduring Freedom on 7 October to overthrow the Taliban system Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. From 2001 Somalia Operation Enduring Freedom, the U.S. Navy secures maritime trade routes around Somali waters. 20 March 2003 Iraq Operation Iraqi Freedom Forces of a 48-nation coalition attacked Iraq in the Third Gulf War and overthrew the government of Saddam Hussein. Iraq was temporarily administered as a protectorate. Elections were held in the summer of 2005 and the affairs of state were officially handed over to the elected government. American troops left the country in 2011. March 2004 Haiti. After the overthrow of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the United States sent an initial 50, later 200, troops to Haiti in preparation for a United Nations Security Council multinational transition force. Somalia. The U.S. Navy fights Somali pirates in alliance with other naval units from various participating nations. Spring 2011 Libya military airstrikes as well as naval missile strikes against Libya to enforce a no-fly zone and prevent military strikes by ruler Muammar al-Gaddafi against suspect insurgents in the country. March 2014 Uganda. In March, U.S. Special Forces arrived in Uganda to assist African Union forces in the search for suspected war criminal Joseph Kony. 2014 Liberia Operation United Assistance to combat the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. U.S. troops set up treatment facilities in Liberia, starting in September with the participation of 539 soldiers. After the president had spoken of 3,000 soldiers, 4 leaders up to 4,700 soldiers are to be deployed in West Africa, according to media reports. 2014 Middle East. Since June 2014, the United States of America has been conducting Operation Inherent Resolve to fight the Islamic State terror militia. 2015 Yemen military intervention in Yemen since 2015. 7 April 2017 Syria airstrike on Ash-Sharat military airfield in Syria. 14 April 2018 Syria airstrike on Douma in Syria. Jan 2020 Arab airstrike to kill Iranian General Qasem Soleimani.